So far, we've looked at the head. Now, today's lesson is going to be what are we going to put the head on? So we're going to be looking at, that's right, the body. So I'm going to do in this lesson straight on view again, but I want to really take a look at the anatomy. What are the elements, the pieces that make up the body? Then, next lesson, we'll start having fun with it and playing with proportions and things. So first thing, with our sketch pad, I want to kind of give us some perimeters. I want to have a line up top and one down below. This is going to be the height of our character that we can stay within. And one thing we're going to do, I'm going to do this very lightly, hopefully you can see it, is the head will be so big. And what we're going to do, and let me see if I can get that same dimension. So let me see, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Perfect. So the regular proportion of the body is 8 heads high. So that's why I want to divide this up so that from this top line to the bottom line, we have 8 divisions, so I can work out the proportions of the body. Okay, so first off, we're going to do the head, and we've been using squares and such. I'm going to do a little different this time. I'm going to do a bit of a circle here, and then bring a couple of lines down and bring them across, representing the jaw and the chin. And this really is the skull of the character. Okay, and looking at proportions, we're going to have the nose in the middle. Here's just the brow. I'm going to put the eyes in at this point, and where the mouth would go. And ears are kind of between the brow and the bottom of the nose, and that's just kind of a generality. And again, with proportions and positioning, we can put it all over the place, but for a standard, kind of more realistic, this is the proportions that we work with. Okay, so that's what we've got to work with here, and that is the head, and we've looked at the head pretty closely, you know, mostly being very cartoony with it and very basic shapes. So we're going to get a little bit more elaborate, but I want to use those shapes as we look at the components of the body. From the head, which we haven't been doing with our characters so far with the head, is there's a neck. And generally that is narrower than the head. And again, we can look at that as a square piece, and that would be the neck of the character. Then what we can take a look at is a block here. Actually, I'm going to make this rectangular block here. And we can get a little more complex with the shape as we go, but we want to start with some basic shapes, just the same as we started with a circle and some lines and, you know, kind of a square shape for the bottom of the head and working on the face. So here, I'm going to extend some lines down, and with this block here, what that's going to represent is the upper part of this block here is the chest, and the overall, this whole block here is the torso of the character. Okay, so what that includes is the rib cage, and usually that rib cage has kind of a shape like this, and then it comes up. Okay. And then what we have below that is, again, we can put another square in here, and what we have in this case is a waist. I'm going to go over this in pencil and just nail everything down. I like working light and in blue. It's that structure. It's a working drawing. We're exploring the anatomy and the proportions of the body and all the components that build up in it, and then we'll finish it off. Okay. So if I go on this side here, in this section here, and we can use a circle or I can use a bit of a square here, is the shoulder. Okay, and that attaches to the side of the torso or the chest. And that gives us mobility. That's kind of the start of the arms of the character. And again, we can play with proportions and such there. So if I continue down with that arm, and I like using some, not just square blocks, but a little bit of angle to lines, just to make it look, the human body's organic, so try to use some curvature to the lines and such to make it look organic. So from that shoulder, we have the upper arm. And the muscle that we see here, and this is something we hear about, especially with people who work out and such, that is the bicep. Then we have a joint, which is the elbow. And that usually lines up with the bottom of the rib cage or somewhere close to the waist. Okay, so that kind of gives us some proportion to measure things off with to see how they're working. Then we have an extension to that arm. And I've just got some, indicating some muscle mass here and even the curvature of the bone that works there. And this is the forearm, is this area here. Okay. And then from there, we have a wrist. And that wrist is the narrowing of that arm. And that's a joint in here. That's where we have flexibility in our wrist. And then that comes out to the hand. And this is where definitely I use a square. When we're looking at the inside of the hand, it's the palm. On the other, it's the back of the hand. So this is going to be the back of the hand. And then from there is where the fingers come out from. And I'm just going to make 3 fingers, kind of that simple, more cartoony. And I'm going to make them different lengths. The one in the middle is going to be slightly longer than this one, and this one's slightly shorter. So again, that organic kind of curvature that we're going to put so that it's not really blocky, even though we start with blocks. So I've got 3 fingers, but then that, this is what we've got here. Hang on, let me see. I'm going to label this. So we've got that. That is the back of the hand. And then we have fingers. And we can play with however many we want. Again, proportions we can play with. I'm kind of going with standard proportions as a starting base, kind of based on human anatomy as we know. Then we'll cartoon it and have fun with it. What we need now is a thumb. There we go. So I've kind of got a smooth line and then a little bit more volume here at the end and have it curve in. Might be a bit large in the big picture of proportions, but that's okay. Gives us a starting point. So we can see all the elements that build an arm. And again, we can simplify that a whole lot when we go cartoony, but to have a knowledge of what we're cartooning always makes for a better result. Now, if we get back to the basic body here, yeah, let's get on with that. Actually, I was thinking of building this other arm. Let me do that first. Let's finish with our arms here. So this one, I want to do something different with. And that is, I want to bring this arm up. So there's this arm over here. There's that shoulder shape. We have that elbow. I'm going to indicate that with a little line. Then I'm going to curve, same as I've done here. I'm going to curve that up and do another block. But this was the back of the hand, so on this one, I want to show the palm so we can see the difference of the inside of the hand to the outside. Not a whole lot of difference, but there's a little trick that we can tell one from the other. So again, we're going to have the thumb coming out of that, and again with a block, almost the same block here, we're going to divide that up into fingers, but it's going to have a rounded top, or at least different length on those fingers. Now, how do we make that look like the inside? Make it look like the palm? We're going to put a little line in here, and that's to show the palm where the thumb can fold into it. So, you know, the palm has a lot more folds and things into it that makes the hand useful and articulated, is these folds and such in the pad of the palm. Okay, so we just want to be able to tell the difference between the two if we can. All right, cool. So now we're going to work our way down the body. So now I'm going to use a different shape. I'm going to use this sort of shape here. And what that represents is this whole shape here is the pelvis. And from the pelvis, we work on the hips, or in this case, a hip. Okay. So again, proportions, these are kind of idyllic, and again, we can play with those completely when we get into cartooning. So what we want to do is this leg, we want to find a midpoint between here and here, and then the final down here. So we're going to be working on this upper leg, or known as the thigh, and that comes off the pelvis, and it's jointed. So again, we don't need to see the circle, but it's just giving the idea that there's a hip. That's where the hip joint is. And usually this line is pretty straight. This one has curvature, and it curves into where the knee would be. We could use a square or a bigger square and a smaller square to represent the knee. And then we have, oh, here we go. We got the knee. Then usually at the joints, things narrow. Like at the elbow, we can see things narrow up. At the knee, things narrow up. And that's really helpful in animation. And again, this is where I go with a lot of my stuff is animation, even though this is an animation class, is that narrower joints are easier to animate and to make them work to give the characters lots of flexibility. So it's just a cool little thing to think of. So now we've got to connect the bottom here. So we got another curve here, curves more here and then straightens out, and then here comes out and comes in. And this is the lower leg, and it's made up of, at the front, it's usually a curvature, is a shin. That's that bone at the front of your lower leg. And these protrusions we see is usually the calf, and that is the muscle that allows us to walk and run and that sort of thing. Then we have the ankle, which narrows again. Again, those joints seem to narrow. And if you really look at your ankle, you'll see there are ankle joints here. So you see a little bit, and again, I'm getting into a lot of detail here. The ankle bone kind of comes out high on the inside and lower on this side. And then the foot is basically a triangle. And here we go, we've got the foot. And then we can indicate toes. And again, we don't see the toes if we're working with footwear, which a lot of our characters would have, one way or another. So here, I'm just going to rough in the other leg here, just so it's symmetrical, or looks complete. And again, that's pretty much anatomy for what we're doing. And again, this is what I want you to do in this lesson, is follow along. Again, you can go back and review this video and make your visual notes. of everything I've been doing here visually. And again, you can play around. I mean, these are not carved in stone measurements and divisions, but it is kind of that idyllic real human being dimensions. So if you want to try and get them as accurately as you can here, that would be excellent. And I need you to follow this along and digitally submit that image so that I can see that you got this lesson, that you've given it a go, and you have a basic understanding of the components of the body and its proportion, idyllic proportion, to the head, which we've had a fair bit of playing around with so far. So here, and please go over it with pencil as best you can, just to make sure I can see it when you take your picture. And again, I'm going over it in pencil too, so that on this video, hopefully you can see all of the image and be able to get, and I want you to put all the names of those components, because we're going to refer to these as we're building a character. And even if some of these are minimalized or even ignored, that is a creative choice that you can make. But we want to make those choices by being educated of what we're playing with. And then it is a conscious, educated decision if you're not going to have certain parts of the body. Again, I don't know why I was doing the arrow there, but again, that's that narrowing where joints work, and the same with the wrist here. And these are good references as you're working on characters and things, that you have some names of what things are. So if you're talking about the proportions and the design of a character, we've got a common reference of what the name of things are. So again, there's that square for the palm. Even if it's the back of the hand, you know, that's that square. And then the fingers come off from that. And again, I simplified with 3 instead of the 4. A lot of cartoon, definitely animation does that for economy's sake, and just clarity, just, you know, simpler, just easier to read. Here's that pelvis. So usually I got that because the pelvis and the hip, usually you can see a bit of bone here, or at least feel it, you know, there's flesh and muscle and such, but then there's parts of the body where we can see or feel the bone near the surface, and that's what's happening at the pelvis and the hips here. Okay, now we can come down here. Some curvature. We've got that kind of knee. We have that calf and muscle on either side, and again, that's just an indication of that shin. And all the bones in the human body have curvature to them. Again, organic, I was mentioning before. Again, my putting in these little, again, I talked about bones at the surface, we get that at the ankle. And again, that's a detail more than likely we would ignore in a cartoon character, or we wouldn't even see because we've got footwear on the character. Okay. So these are things, again, if this is of interest to you, and again, you're interested in the drawing aspect of our Foundations program here, that I would recommend research this a little more. Don't just take my word for it. You know, check out the anatomy. And again, with our program, animation, character is a huge part of what the program's all about, because animation is all about people and characters and getting personality and such. So within our program, we do a lot of figure drawing from live models, so we can see all of this happening, so we can look at it and understand it and build it, build drawings from real life. And then from that reality, we can caricature, cartoon, and play around with. Okay, here we go. So again, inside palm. So that's the palm of the hand. That's that square right here. And then the thumb and the fingers come off of that. So often we describe the thumb separate from the fingers because it attaches from the side of the palm and the fingers are at the top of the palm. So you know what I should do is I should put thumb here, and here are fingers, just for that separation. Okay, and again the chest, which is this area here, and then even in here we usually get a little bit of those shoulders. There's a bone that you can see at the top of the chest which connect into these shoulders, and that's what gives us movement. And even on the neck we can put a little bit of a line here for muscles, and just the thorax of the throat here in the foreground. So again, these are little details which you can ignore or put in when you start building a character. So again, we've got the chest, we have the rib cage here, and all of this combined is known as the torso. And where that connects with the pelvis, from that rib cage here to the pelvis, is the waist. And it usually narrows because there's no bone or anything in there. There is I'm just going to put some lines here, a spine that is holding that from a skeletal perspective, connects the rib cage to the pelvis, and in here is just the anatomy with inside the character. Again, we have muscles and things, but that's where stomach, intestines, and all this sort of stuff is, which we don't have to deal with because we're not drawing invisible characters or see-through characters. There you go. Pelvis, which we have a hip connecting there. This whole upper leg, as opposed to saying upper leg, we refer that to the thigh. We have the knee, which connects the lower leg, which is also, well, the components of that, which we already talked about, is the shin, which is the bone, and the calf, which is the muscle. And these are just elements to draw with, or to use, or make exaggerated, or ignore. The ankle, then we have the foot, which could be a shoe, or if it's just the foot, then we've got toes. And over here, just the back of hand. And then fingers again, which are already labeled on the other side, but that's okay. All right, so that's today's lesson. Please go over this, draw up your visual note, and actually write in all of the elements we've talked about. That's what we're going to be working with here on in. So we just want to have an understanding before we start plowing in and really having fun. It's more the technical aspect, this lesson. Okay, so get this one in, and the next lesson will be playing with proportions and, the fun part of this.